The Sicilian defense is one of the strongest openings in chess, yet many players avoid it because it seems too complicated. In this video, I'll show you a simple and beginner-friendly Sicilian variation that is easy to learn, effective in practice, and packed with attacking opportunities. While moving the pawn to c5, you control the important d4 square and immediately challenge white's center. Another advantage is that the two pawns in front of your king remain in place, helping to keep your king safe and preventing early attacks. There is also another major benefit to choosing the Sicilian defense. Most opening tricks, traps, and attacking ideas that white studies are designed against the move pawn to e5. By advancing the c-pawn instead, you take your opponent out of their comfort zone right from the start. The variation I recommend begins with pawn to e6. At beginner and intermediate levels, many players do not know how to handle the Sicilian defense and simply continue as if they are playing the Italian game, often developing their bishop to c4. Against pawn to e6, however, this move is ineffective because you can immediately strike with pawn to d5. After the exchange, white's bishop must move again, losing time while you build a strong pawn center. The main move for white is pawn to d4, aiming to seize more central space and open the diagonal for the light-squared bishop. As soon as white advances the pawn to d4, you should capture it with pawn takes d4. If you do not challenge white's center, the central pawns can continue advancing and gain too much space. For example, if you develop the knight to f6 too early, white can play pawn to e5 and attack it. Likewise, if you develop the knight to c6 first, white can push pawn to d5 and gain space while driving your pieces back. After pawn takes d4, white should recapture with the knight. Recapturing with the queen would expose it too early and allow black to gain time by attacking it. Therefore, knight takes d4 is the standard move. Now develop the knight to f6. This attacks white's central pawn on e4, develops a piece, and creates a tactical idea. If white tries pawn to e5, attacking your knight, you can respond with queen to a5. This move gives check to the king and launches a counterattack. After white deals with the check, you will often be able to win the pawn on e5. The best response for white is usually to defend the pawn by developing a knight. Then you continue with knight to c6. This leads to the four knights variation of the Sicilian defense. I recommend this setup because it is much simpler than sharp Sicilian systems such as the Najdorf variation or the dragon variation. Those openings are excellent, but contain many complex attacking lines that require extensive preparation. In contrast, the four knights variation is straightforward, solid, and very effective at club level. Most opponents below expert level do not handle it correctly and often drift into uncomfortable positions. One of black's key ideas is to develop the dark-squared bishop aggressively to b4, putting pressure on white's position and targeting the pawn on e4. For example, many players choose bishop to g5, pinning your knight on f6. Instead of defending passively, you can play bishop to b4. This move pins the knight on c3 and increases the pressure on white's center. The knight on c3 cannot move freely because it is pinned to the king, while the knight on d4 is also under pressure. As a result, the pawn on e4 can become difficult for white to defend, giving black excellent practical chances. At the moment, the pressure is not decisive yet, but it can become very dangerous very quickly. The knight on c3 is pinned, which means white must always be careful about tactical threats. Meanwhile, black's queen on d8 is ready to join the attack at any moment, often by moving to a5 or b6 and increasing the pressure on white's position. Many players underestimate these threats and end up collapsing surprisingly fast. For example, a common continuation is for white to capture on c6 with the knight, hoping to damage black's pawn structure. Black simply recaptures with the b-pawn, opening the b-file for the rook and maintaining excellent central control. White often follows up with pawn to e5, believing that the attack on the knight gives them a strong advantage. However, this is actually where black's counterplay begins. Instead of retreating, black can play the powerful move queen to a5. This move creates multiple threats at once. The queen attacks important targets across the board and increases the pressure on white's pinned pieces. If white now captures the knight on f6 with the bishop, black can simply capture the bishop on g5 with the queen. Notice how difficult white's position has become. The knight on c3 remains pinned and is now vulnerable to further attacks. Black's queen is actively placed, white's development is restricted, and the open b-file gives black additional attacking opportunities for the rook later in the game. There is also a very interesting tactical idea if white tries to defend the knight on c3 with queen to d3. In this case, black can play bishop to a6, offering a temporary sacrifice to deflect white's queen from its defensive duties. If white accepts the bishop, black continues with bishop takes c3 check. This move comes with a double attack and creates serious problems for white. Although black may appear to be sacrificing material, the tactical sequence works in black's favor. After queen takes c3, black can respond with queen takes c3 check, exposing white's king and creating further threats. The attack continues with black winning important material, often including a rook, and emerging with a clearly superior position. Another common mistake is for white to capture the knight on f6 with the bishop instead of trying to defend. In that case, black should not rush to recapture the bishop. Instead, the strongest move is bishop takes c3 check. The check is a crucial detail because it turns the sequence into a forcing variation. White must respond to the check immediately and has very limited options. After bishop takes c3 check and pawn takes c3, black follows up with queen takes c3 check. White cannot comfortably block with the queen because doing so would leave the rook on a1 undefended. As a result, white is often forced to play king to e2, an awkward move that leaves the king exposed and prevents smooth development. And now the move bishop to a6 is almost crushing. White is suddenly facing threats everywhere and may end up losing the queen, a rook, or even more material. The most common move here is bishop to e3, which is easy to understand. In many Sicilian lines, especially dragon-type positions, white's standard plan is bishop e3, followed by f3, queen d2, and queenside castling, leading to a powerful kingside attack. However, against the four knights variation, bishop e3 is actually a mistake. Black immediately responds with bishop to b4. The idea is simple, but very effective. The knight on c3 is now pinned, meaning that knight takes e4 becomes a serious threat. Since the knight can no longer properly defend the e4 pawn, white often tries to protect it with pawn to f3, still hoping to continue the usual setup. But this move neglects development once again, and gives black exactly what they want. Black strikes with d5, challenging the center and seizing the initiative. Suddenly the e4 pawn is under tremendous pressure. The knight remains pinned, and white is already struggling. If white exchanges in the center, that usually only helps black's activity. Sometimes opponents become so focused on the pinned knight and all the threats that they simply lose track of their pieces. A move like this can even drop the knight on d4 outright. There are plenty of ways for white to go wrong because the position is already extremely difficult. Everything is hanging together by a thread. A stronger attempt is capturing on c6. Black recaptures, and despite the exchange, white's position remains under pressure. After bishop d2 to support the knight, black has several promising continuations. One of my favorites is simply castling. It looks quiet, but it contains a nasty trap. There is still pressure throughout the position, and white may decide to simplify by exchanging pieces. After black recaptures, it appears that the bishop on b4 has been left undefended. White happily grabs it, believing they have won a free piece while also attacking the rook. But now comes the surprise. Black has the beautiful move queen to h4. It creates a powerful double attack and comes with check. On the next move, black follows up with another check and keeps the initiative rolling. Soon the queen invades on b2, attacking the rook and picking up a pawn. The king remains exposed, rook e8 is ready to join the attack, and new threats appear with every move. Despite appearing down material for a moment, black's activity is overwhelming, and the position is actually winning.